They didn't just doubt him. They said it clearly: a Navy SEAL is nothing after war. And this time, those words came from his own family. No arguments, no explanations. He quietly returned to an old roadside station no one wanted. A place that seemed worthless. Yet it was where his grandfather once started from nothing. And strangely, the dog beside him never hesitated, as if it knew he was never useless. Day by day, he didn't try to prove anything. But the people who turned their backs began to look again. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to help us reach 1,000 followers, so we can keep sharing meaningful stories. Now, let's begin. The road into Hollow Creek did not welcome people. It tolerated them. It stretched out in long, quiet lines beneath a pale northern sky, bordered by pine trees that stood too still, as if they had learned long ago that movement only drew attention. The asphalt was cracked in places, patched in others, and dust lifted behind Ethan Cade's truck like something reluctant to follow. Inside, there was no music, no voice, just the steady hum of the engine and the faint shift of breath beside him. Bruno sat in the passenger seat, 6 years old, German Shepherd. Sable coat layers of cream, gray, and black that caught the light in uneven ways, like ash over embers. His build was lean, not bulky, every line of muscle shaped by function rather than show. His amber eyes were open, alert, but not restless. He wasn't looking out the window, but he was watching Ethan, not constantly, not in a way that demanded anything, just enough to notice. Ethan kept both hands on the wheel. His fingers were steady, but the skin across his knuckles carried old stories, small scars, faint lines, the kind that didn't fade because they weren't meant to. He was 35, but the years had settled into him differently. He stood about 6 feet tall, his body lean and tightly built, not exaggerated, not for display, just efficient. His face was clean-shaven, sharp lines defined by a square jaw and pronounced cheekbones. No softness, but not hard either, just set. His dark brown hair was cut short, military style, slightly longer than strict regulation, enough to suggest distance from the uniform but not separation from it. His eyes, gray-blue, held something that didn't move easily. When they rested on something, they didn't judge it. They simply took it in. He hadn't been back here in years. Not because he couldn't, but because there was nothing waiting. Or at least that's what he had told himself. The town sign appeared just past a bend. Hollow Creek, Pop. 1102. The numbers had been repainted more than once. They didn't quite align anymore. Ethan slowed slightly as he passed through. A diner sat on the left, windows fogged from inside. A gas station stood across from it, old pumps, faded red paint. A man leaned against the building, mid-40s, heavy-set, arms folded, not watching in curiosity, but in calculation. Ethan didn't look at him long. He didn't need to. Bruno's ears shifted just slightly. That was enough. They drove through without stopping. The road narrowed again as it climbed toward the edge of town, where the old route split away from the newer highway. The main road curved east clean, maintained, alive with movement. Ethan turned west. The tires rolled over older pavement, rougher, quieter. Pine trees closed in again, taller this time, as their shadows stretching across the road like something reaching. The truck slowed, then stopped. The building stood where the road widened just enough to breathe. The station. It didn't look like much. A low structure of wood and faded siding, the paint worn thin by years of weather. The roof sagged slightly at one corner, and the sign above the door, once bold, was now barely readable, the letters chipped and uneven. A couple of old fuel pumps stood off to the side, rust creeping along their edges. The lot was cracked, weeds pushing through where the ground had given up holding itself together. No movement, no sound, just a place that had been left. Ethan turned off the engine. Silence settled in. He sat there for a moment, hands still on the wheel, eyes forward. "This is it," he said, more to the space than to the dog. Bruno didn't move. Then, slowly, the dog stood, stepping down from the seat with controlled precision. His paws hit the ground with soft, measured impact. He didn't rush, didn't explore. He walked straight toward the front of the building and stopped, right in front of the door. Ethan watched him. That wasn't curiosity, that was position. He stepped out of the truck, boots landing on gravel with a dull crunch. The air was colder here, sharper, carrying the scent of pine and something older wood. Dust. Time. He moved closer. Bruno didn't look at him, just kept his gaze fixed on the door. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out the envelope. Thick paper, official. The edges already softened from being handled more than he'd admit. He unfolded the document again, though he didn't need to. Property transfer. Ethan Cade. Location. Former Cade roadside station signed. Filed. Final. There was no mistake. Behind it, folded once more, was the letter. He hadn't read it again since the first time. Didn't need to. Still, he opened it. The handwriting was uneven in places, but deliberate. "They'll think I left you nothing." Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. "That's fine. Oh, they've always taken what was easy." The wind shifted, brushing lightly against the side of the building. Bruno's ears flicked. Ethan continued. "I started here when I had less than you do now." A pause. Ethan could almost see it. An older man, standing in this same spot, looking at the same broken boards, the same empty road. "They said I wouldn't last." He exhaled slowly. Of course they had. Maybe they'll say the same about you. Ethan let out a faint breath that might have been a laugh if it had been warmer. Good. The word lingered. This place isn't for someone who needs to win fast. It's for someone who doesn't leave. Ethan lowered the paper slightly. Didn't leave. He looked at the road behind him. Long. Quiet. Familiar. Bruno suddenly shifted. Not sharply. Not aggressively. But with purpose. The dog stepped forward one pace, then another, and placed himself directly between Ethan and the road. His body angled slightly, not blocking, but redirecting. Then he sat, not casually, deliberately, facing the station. Ethan frowned. "Bruno." No response. The dog didn't look back. Didn't move. Just sat there, as if the decision had already been made, and it wasn't his to question. For a brief second, something old stirred in Ethan's chest. Not memory exactly, not instinct, recognition. The same stillness before a choice, the same moment where walking away would be easier. He folded the letter again, slower this time, slid it back into the envelope. The wood of the building creaked softly as the wind pressed against it. A loose panel shifted, then settled. Ethan stepped forward. The door was heavier than it looked. The hinges resisted at first, then gave with a long, low groan that echoed into the space beyond. Dust lifted in the air, catching the light in slow motion. Inside, the station held its breath. A counter stretched along one side, worn smooth in places where hands had once rested again and again. On shelves lined the back wall, mostly empty now, a few forgotten items left behind like afterthoughts. A chair sat near the corner. Old. Wood. One leg slightly shorter than the others. Ethan stepped inside. His boots sounded louder than they should have. Bruno followed, slower, nose lowering slightly as he moved. Not searching, mapping. Ethan's eyes moved across the room, then stopped. The chair. He walked toward it, each step measured, ran his hand along the backrest. There, near the top, carved faintly into the wood, almost worn away, C.C. Cade. He swallowed once, not visibly, but it was there. The letter echoed again in his head. I started here. Ethan pulled the chair back slightly. It wobbled, just enough to be annoying. He paused, then crouched, adjusting the leg with a small piece of wood from the floor, wedging it carefully until it sat even. He stood, tested it, stable. Bruno watched him. For the first time since they arrived, the dog's posture eased just slightly. Ethan didn't notice. Or maybe he did. He turned, looking back toward the door. The light outside had shifted a little, the shadows longer now. The road was still there, still open, still offering. He walked to the entrance and stood in the doorway. Same spot, same angle. The wind moved through the trees again, carrying the faint sound of something distant, a truck, maybe, far off on the old route. Ethan rested one hand against the frame. Didn't step out. Didn't step back. Just stood there. And for the first time in a long time, he didn't feel the need to leave. Morning did not arrive all at once in Hollow Creek. It seeped in slowly, like light, unsure if it was welcome. Ethan Cade was already awake when the first pale gray pushed through the broken edges of the window. He hadn't slept much. Not because the place was uncomfortable, he had slept in worse, colder, louder places, but because silence here felt different. It didn't press. It waited. He sat on the floor near the counter, back against the wall, boots still on. The old wood beneath him carried a faint chill, but his body didn't react to it. Years of training had taught him how to exist without comfort. Bruno lay a few feet away. The German shepherd's body was stretched out, but not relaxed. His head rested on his paws, ears tilted just enough to catch any change in sound. His breathing was slow, even. Resting, but never off duty. Ethan watched him for a moment. You ever actually sleep? He muttered. One ear flicked. That was answer enough. Outside, a distant engine rolled across the old road, faint but steady. Not close, not stopping, just passing through. Ethan stood, joints moving with controlled stiffness, and stepped outside. The air was sharper this morning, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. The kind of smell that settled into clothes and stayed. The station looked worse in daylight. What had seemed quiet in the evening now revealed itself as neglect. The paint was more worn than he remembered. The cracks in the lot ran deeper. The fuel pumps leaned slightly, as if they had given up standing straight years ago. He walked the perimeter slowly, assessing. The way he always had, structure, entry points, weak spots, lines of sight. Old habits didn't fade, they adapted. A truck passed on the distant curve of the road. Ethan turned his head just slightly. Old root. Still in use. Not much, but not dead. Behind him, Bruno stepped out of the station and moved beside him, his nose lifting briefly to the air. He didn't wander, didn't chase scent trails. He stayed within a few steps of Ethan. That was new. Ethan noticed it, didn't comment. Instead, he crouched near one of the fuel pumps, running his hand along the metal surface. Rust flaked beneath his fingers. The hoses were stiff, cracked, dead. For now. A voice carried from behind him. "You planning on bringing that thing back to life?" Ethan turned. The man stood near the edge of the lot, hands tucked into the pockets of a worn jacket. Mid-40s, maybe older. It was hard to tell. His build was solid but softened by years of long drives and inconsistent rest. His face held the kind of tired that didn't come from one bad night, but from too many similar ones. He wore a faded baseball cap, the brim curved low, shadowing eyes that still managed to stay sharp. There was a steadiness to him. Not aggressive, not defensive, just present. Ethan straightened. "That depends," he said. "You planning on stopping?" The man let out a quiet breath that might have been a laugh. "Not today." He stepped closer, boots crunching against gravel. Up close, the lines around his eyes were clearer, not bitterness, just wear. "Name's Evan Dorsey," he said, extending a hand. Ethan looked at it for a second, then shook it. "Ethan." Evan's grip was firm, but not testing. "Yeah," Evan said. "Figured." He glanced toward the station, then back at Ethan. "Your grandfather built this place," he added, "back when this road actually meant something." Ethan didn't respond immediately. "I heard." Evan nodded, as if that was enough. "He didn't start with much," he continued. "Just coffee, gas, and a reason for people to stop. That was enough back then." Ethan's gaze drifted to the road again. "And now?" he asked. Evan followed his line of sight. "Now, people don't stop unless they have to." A pause. "But they still come through," Evan added. "Trucks, mostly. Guys avoiding the tolls. Folks who know the old ways are still faster sometimes." Ethan took that in. Not a solution, but a piece. Bruno shifted beside him, his attention briefly on Evan. Not tense, just reading. Evan noticed. "That dog yours?" he asked. Ethan nodded. "K9?" Evan guessed. "Used to be." Evan studied Bruno for a moment longer, then gave a small nod. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That tracks." The wind picked up slightly, pushing a loose sign against the side of the building with a hollow tap. Evan glanced toward it. "You'll need permits," he said after a moment. "Can't just open up and start serving people. Sheriff will be by sooner or later." Ethan gave a small nod. "I figured." Evan hesitated, then added, "Name's Mercer. Dale Mercer. Not a bad guy. Just doesn't like surprises." Ethan almost smiled. Neither did he. Evan stepped back, and adjusting his cap. "Well," he said. "Good luck with it." He turned, walking toward his truck parked down the road. Before climbing in, he paused and looked back. "One more thing," he said. Ethan waited. "People didn't stop here because it was convenient," Evan said. "They stopped because your grandfather made it worth it." He held Ethan's gaze for a second longer. "Don't mix those up." Then he got into his truck and drove off, the sound fading into the distance. Ethan stood there for a while. Bruno moved first. He walked toward the road, stopping just at the edge where gravel met asphalt. His posture shifted slightly forward, ears angled, eyes focused on something Ethan couldn't see. Not danger, not curiosity. Something else. Ethan followed, standing a step behind him. "You see something?" he asked quietly. Bruno didn't respond, just watched. The road remained empty. Wind moved through the trees. Nothing. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he murmured. "Me neither." But he didn't move away immediately. Neither did Bruno. A faint sound broke through the quiet. Not from the road, from behind them. A soft creak. Ethan turned sharply, instincts snapping into place before thought could catch up. The station door, left slightly ajar, shifted inward. Slow, deliberate. There was no wind strong enough to do that. Bruno reacted instantly. Not barking, not lunging. He stepped between Ethan and the doorway, body low, muscles tight, a quiet, controlled tension building beneath his coat. Ethan's hand moved instinctively toward his side, where a weapon would have been years ago. Now, there was nothing. Just him. The door stopped moving. Silence returned. Ethan waited. 1 second. 2. 3. Nothing came out. No movement. No sound. Bruno held position for a few moments longer, then slowly, carefully, his posture eased. Not fully. Just enough. Ethan stepped forward, pushed the door open. Inside, everything was exactly as it had been. Dust. Stillness. The chair. On the counter. Nothing disturbed. He stood there, listening. There was no presence, no threat, just space. He exhaled. "Old hinges," he said under his breath. Bruno didn't move, didn't agree, didn't disagree. Ethan stepped back outside. The moment passed, but it didn't disappear. He returned to the lot, scanning the ground, the pumps, the structure again, but this time with a different weight behind his focus. Not just repair. Possibility. He crouched near the base of the building, checking the foundation. Solid enough. Weathered, but holding. Workable. Everything here was workable. That was the problem. Nothing was easy. He stood, brushing dust from his hands. The road stretched ahead again, long and quiet. A truck appeared in the distance, moving slowly along the curve. Ethan watched it. It didn't turn, didn't slow, just passed. He nodded once to himself. "Not yet," he said quietly. Bruno returned to his side, sitting down without command. I'm facing the road, waiting. Ethan looked at him, then back at the station. "You're not leaving," he said. It wasn't a question. Bruno didn't respond. Ethan let out a slow breath. "Yeah," he muttered. "Me neither." The wind moved again, softer this time, brushing past the building and carrying with it the faint echo of something older voices, maybe, or memory, or just the sound of a place that had not forgotten what it once was. Ethan turned back toward the station. There was work to do, not because it would succeed. Not because it made sense, but because it was still there. And for now, so was he. The first real day of work began without announcement. No milestone, no decision spoken out loud, just movement. Ethan Cade stepped out of the station just after sunrise, sleeves already pushed to his forearms, breath steady in the cold northern air. The sky held that pale, washed-out blue that came before the sun fully committed to the day, and the trees stood in their usual silence, tall and indifferent. Bruno followed a step behind. The German Shepherd moved differently this morning, not tense, not alert in the way he had been the day before, but focused. His nose dipped occasionally toward the ground, catching faint traces of scent carried overnight. His amber eyes moved slowly, deliberately, tracking space more than objects. Ethan grabbed the loose board leaning against the wall and set it down beside the entrance. But the door didn't sit right. It wasn't just the hinges, it was the frame. Warped. Subtle, but enough to matter. He crouched, running his fingers along the wood, feeling the uneven edge. His movements were efficient, practiced, not because he had done this exact task before, but because he had done enough things like it. Adaptation. That was the skill that stayed. Bruno settled a few feet away, lowering himself onto the ground, but not fully resting. His head remained up, ears angled, watching the road. Ethan noticed. "Nothing yet," he said under his breath. Bruno didn't move. Ethan worked. The first few hours passed without interruption. Nails pulled, wood adjusted, hinges tightened. The sound of metal against wood echoed softly through the stillness, blending with the occasional whisper of wind through the trees. Time stretched differently here. There was no clock, but Ethan felt it anyway, through the rhythm of his breathing, the weight of each motion, the slow shift of light across the ground. At some point, a vehicle passed. He didn't look up. Neither did Bruno. The truck didn't slow, didn't stop, just continued on, leaving behind a faint trail of dust that settled slowly across the lot. Ethan stood, rolling his shoulders once. The door sat straighter now. Not perfect, but better. He stepped back, testing it. Open, close, no drag, no resistance. He nodded once. Workable. He moved on to the next problem. The counter inside. It had been solid once. You could see that in the way the wood had worn smooth in some places, uneven in others, shaped by years of hands resting, sliding, tapping. Now it leaned slightly to one side, the weight uneven. Ethan braced one hand against it and pushed. It shifted. Too easily. He crouched again, checking the base. Loose joints, old fasteners. Time had done what time always did. It had taken something stable and made it uncertain. He reached for a tool from the small pile he had gathered, was adjusted, tightened, reset. Bruno stood and moved closer this time, stepping inside the station. His paws made soft sounds against the wooden floor, each step placed carefully, as if the space itself required a certain respect. He paused near the chair, the same chair Ethan had fixed the night before. He lowered his head, sniffed once, then lifted it again. Not curiosity. Recognition. Ethan glanced at him. "You remember something?" he asked quietly. Bruno didn't respond, just moved on. The day continued like that. Small fixes, quiet progress, no reward, no sign that anything had changed. And yet, something had. Around midday, Ethan stepped outside again, wiping his hands against his pants. The sun had climbed higher now, though it gave little warmth. The air remained sharp, cutting just enough to keep the body awake. A truck approached from the curve. Slower this time. Ethan noticed immediately. Bruno did too. The dog stood, their posture shifting. Not aggressive, not defensive, just attentive. The truck rolled closer, engine low, steady. It didn't pass. It pulled into the lot. Gravel shifted under the tires as the vehicle came to a stop near the pumps. Ethan didn't move. He watched. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Mid-30s. Tall, but not imposing. His frame was lean, built from repetition rather than intention-long hours. Consistent work, not much rest. His face was clean, though rough around the edges, skin marked by wind and sun. Light stubble lined his jaw, not maintained, just present. His eyes moved first, quick, scanning, then settling on Ethan. "You open?" he asked. His voice carried a slight rasp, the kind that came from too many hours behind the wheel and not enough water. Ethan shook his head once. Not yet. The man exhaled through his nose, glancing back at the road. "Figures," he muttered. He hesitated, then stepped closer. "Name's Caleb," he said. "Ran low on fuel earlier than I thought." Ethan nodded toward the pumps. "Those aren't running." Caleb followed the gesture, then looked back at Ethan. "Yeah, I got that." A pause. Then quieter. "Got anything? Coffee? Water?" Ethan considered it for a second, then turned. "Come inside." Caleb followed. His movements were cautious, not because he felt threatened, but because he wasn't sure what to expect. His eyes took in the space unfinished repairs, tools, dust, the slow evidence of something being rebuilt. He nodded slightly. "Better than I thought," he said. Ethan poured water from a container into a metal cup and handed it over. Caleb took it, drank. Slow, like he wasn't in a hurry to leave just yet. Bruno watched him, not tense, but aware. Caleb noticed. "That dog always look at people like that?" he asked. "Only when he's not sure," Ethan replied. Caleb smirked faintly. "Fair enough." Caleb set the cup down on the counter. It made a small sound. Not loud, but enough. Bruno's head snapped toward the back of the station. Instant, sharp, different from before. This wasn't curiosity. This wasn't routine awareness. This was certainty. His body went still. Completely still. Ethan saw it immediately. Felt it. That shift. That line between normal and not. "What is it?" he asked quietly. Bruno didn't move. Didn't bark. His gaze locked onto the dark hallway behind the counter, the narrow passage Ethan hadn't touched yet. Caleb followed the line of sight. "There's something back there?" he asked. Ethan didn't answer. He stepped forward, slow, controlled, every sense narrowing. The hallway was dim, light barely reaching past the first few feet. The air felt cooler there, heavier, as if it had been left undisturbed longer than the rest of the building. Ethan stopped at the entrance. Listened. Nothing. He took another step. The floor creaked softly beneath him. Still nothing. He turned slightly, glancing back. Bruno hadn't moved. Caleb hadn't either. The moment stretched. Then a small sound. Not from the walls, not from the floor, from above. A faint shift, like something settling in the ceiling. Ethan looked up. Wood, old. Expanding, contracting, temperature. He exhaled slowly. "Structure," he said under his breath. Bruno held his position a second longer. Then, gradually, the tension eased. Not gone, but reduced. Ethan stepped back into the main room. Caleb let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. "Place has a personality," he said. Ethan didn't argue. Caleb picked up the cup again, finishing the last of the water. He set it down more carefully this time. "I'll swing back through," he said after a moment. "Once you're up and running." Ethan gave a small nod. "Yeah." Caleb moved toward the door, pausing briefly beside Bruno. The dog didn't react, didn't acknowledge, just watched. Caleb gave a faint smile. "Guess I passed," he said. Then he stepped outside, climbed into his truck, and drove off. The sound faded. Silence returned. Ethan stood there for a moment longer, then turned back to the counter. There was still work to do. He picked up his tools again, adjusted the base, tightened the joints, set the structure. Bruno moved back to the doorway, sitting in his now familiar place facing the road, watching, waiting. The sun began its slow descent. Light shifted. Shadows stretched. Another vehicle passed. Didn't stop. Ethan didn't look up this time. He didn't need to. Not yet. He finished the last adjustment and stood, wiping his hands once more. The station wasn't fixed, not even close, but it was changing. And for the first time since he had arrived, that change wasn't just something he could see. It was something he could feel. He stepped outside. Bruno remained at his side. The road stretched ahead. Still quiet. Still uncertain. But no longer empty. Ethan looked at it for a long moment, then nodded. Just once. "Not today," he said quietly. But there was no frustration in it. No doubt. Just time. And for now, that was enough. The change didn't announce itself. It didn't arrive with noise or numbers or anything measurable. It showed up quietly, in the space between one day and the next, in the way a place begins to feel. Used again. Ethan Cade noticed it in the ground first. The gravel in the lot shifted differently under his boots that morning. Not by much, just enough to tell him that more than one set of tires had pressed into it since the day before. The marks weren't deep, but they were there, subtle arcs, angled departures, a hesitation near the front where a vehicle had slowed, almost stopped, then moved on. He crouched, running his fingers lightly across the surface. Fresh. Not hours ago, but not old either. He stood, scanning the road. Nothing. The same long stretch of quiet asphalt, disappearing into the trees. Bruno stepped beside him, at his head lowered slightly as he sniffed the ground near the tire marks. His tail remained still, not raised, not tucked, neutral. Focused. "He came back," Ethan said quietly. Bruno didn't look up. Didn't need to. The day unfolded slowly. Ethan moved through the station with a steady rhythm now, no longer searching for where to begin. He had already begun. Now it was about continuing. He replaced a broken panel near the side wall, adjusting each nail with careful precision. The work wasn't perfect, but it was honest. Functional. That was enough. Around mid-morning, a vehicle passed. Then another. Neither stopped, but both slowed. Ethan noticed. He always noticed. Bruno did too. The dog had taken his place just outside the doorway again, sitting with his body angled toward the road. Not guarding, not waiting, just present. A third vehicle appeared. This one didn't slow. It drove straight through, tires humming against the old pavement, disappearing beyond the curve. Ethan didn't react. He had learned long ago that expectation only led to distraction. Instead, he kept working. Inside, the station had begun to shift in ways that weren't obvious at first glance. The counter stood straighter now, the door closed cleanly. The chair, his grandfather's chair, sat level, stable, no longer rocking under weight. Small things, but they added up. The sound of an engine broke through the air again. Closer this time. Ethan paused, setting down the hammer. He stepped outside. A dark pickup truck rolled slowly into the lot, tires crunching over gravel. The vehicle came to a stop near the edge, not pulling in fully, as if undecided. The driver's door opened. A man stepped out. Late 50s. Broad across the shoulders, though age had begun to settle into his frame, softening what had once been strength. His face was lined not just by time, but by something heavier, regret, maybe, or stubbornness worn thin. He had a short gray beard, trimmed but uneven, and his hair, what remained of it, was cut close to the scalp. His eyes were sharp but guarded, the kind that looked at a person and saw history before anything else. Harold Quinn. Ethan didn't need an introduction. They stood there for a moment, the space between them carrying more weight than words could hold. Harold glanced around the station, taking in the changes. "You've been busy," he said. His voice was low, rough, like it hadn't been used for anything important in a long time. Ethan nodded once. "Fixing what's broken." Harold let out a faint breath through his nose. "Plenty of that around here." A pause. His gaze shifted to Bruno. The dog was already watching him. Not aggressively, but not welcoming either. There was a stillness in Bruno's posture that hadn't been there with Evan, or Caleb. Harold noticed. "Dog doesn't like me," he said. Ethan shrugged slightly. "He doesn't like what he doesn't trust." Harold's jaw tightened just a fraction. "Smart animal," he muttered. He stepped closer, boots grinding into the gravel. "You planning to open this place again?" he asked. "That's the idea." Harold glanced back toward the road, then at the pumps. "You're wasting your time." The words came flat, not loud, not aggressive, just certain. Ethan didn't respond immediately. "Maybe," he said after a moment. Harold's eyes narrowed slightly. "That road out there?" he continued, gesturing with his chin. "It's not what it used to be. People don't stop anymore, not unless they have to." Ethan met his gaze. "Then I'll give them a reason." Harold studied him for a long second. There it was. Not anger. Not yet. Something closer to discomfort. Like watching someone make a choice you once had and didn't take. He looked away first. Bruno shifted. Not toward Harold. Toward the truck. His head turned sharply, ears lifting, or body rising from its seated position in one smooth motion. His gaze locked onto the rear of the vehicle. Ethan followed the line. The truck bed, covered, nothing visible. Harold frowned. "What?" he asked. Bruno took one step forward, then stopped, completely still. A low sound built in his chest. Not a growl, not fully, but something deeper. Controlled. Warning. Ethan stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "Open it," he said quietly. Harold hesitated. For just a second. Then walked to the back of the truck and pulled the cover aside. Inside. Nothing. Empty. Old tools. A rusted chain. A spare tire. Harold looked back at Ethan. "Happy?" he asked. Ethan didn't answer. He was watching Bruno. The dog's posture eased slowly, tension draining from his body in measured increments. Not fear, not threat. Just something that had been there and wasn't now. Bruno stepped back, returning to his place near the doorway. Ethan exhaled once. "Old scent," he said. Harold gave a short, humorless laugh. "Yeah," he said. This place is full of that." He let the cover fall back into place. The moment passed, but like the others before it, it didn't disappear. Harold walked back toward Ethan, stopping a few feet away. "You think this is going to work?" he asked. Ethan didn't answer right away. He looked at the station. The door, the counter inside, the road beyond. "I think it's still here," he said. Harold's expression shifted slightly. "That's not the same thing." "No," Ethan agreed. "It's not." Silence settled again. Harold shoved his hands into his jacket pockets. "You know why he left this to you?" he asked suddenly. Ethan's gaze flicked back to him. "Because no one else wanted it," Harold said before Ethan could respond. The words hung there. Simple. Clean. Incomplete. Ethan didn't react. Not outwardly. Harold watched him, waiting for something, a denial, maybe, or anger. He got neither. Instead, Ethan turned and walked back toward the station. The conversation was over. Or maybe it had never really started. Harold stood there for a moment longer, then shook his head slightly and turned away. He climbed back into his truck, the engine starting with a low rumble. Before he pulled out, he looked once more at the building, then at Ethan. There was something in his eyes now. Not agreement, not acceptance, but something quieter, something unsettled. He drove off without another word. The dust settled slowly behind him. Ethan remained where he was, just inside the doorway. Bruno sat beside him. The road stretched out again. Unchanged. And yet, not the same. Ethan rested his hand briefly against the doorframe, feeling the grain of the wood beneath his fingers. Worn, but holding. He looked out at the empty road. "They'll come," he said quietly. Bruno didn't respond. But he didn't move away either. The wind shifted. The trees whispered. And for the first time since the station had been left behind, someone had come back and looked at it like it mattered. Even if they didn't admit it. Ethan stepped fully inside again, picking up the hammer from where he had left it. There was still work to do. And now, there was something else. Not hope, not yet, but resistance. And sometimes, that was enough to begin. The wind carried sound differently that afternoon. Not louder, not clearer, just closer. Ethan Cade noticed it while standing behind the station, one hand braced against the outer wall as he checked the integrity of a section that had begun to pull away from the frame. The wood there had taken years of weather without repair. Fibers split and edges softened into something that no longer resisted pressure. He pressed once. The board shifted. Too easily. He exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he murmured. "You're not staying like that." Bruno stood a few feet away, angled toward the open stretch of road beyond the trees. The German shepherd's posture had changed again over the last day, not tense, not uncertain, but settled into a pattern. He no longer scanned every movement. Instead, he chose where to look. And once he chose, he stayed there. His ears tilted forward now, catching something Ethan hadn't fully registered yet. Ethan followed his gaze. The road curved out of sight, framed by tall pines that leaned inward just enough to narrow the view. Nothing visible. But something was coming. He wiped his hands against his pants and stepped around to the front of the station. The engine reached him first. Low. Uneven. Strained. A vehicle came into view, moving slower than anything he had seen pass so far. A small sedan, older model, paint dulled by years of exposure, one headlight slightly dimmer than the other. It pulled into the lot. Not smoothly. There was hesitation in the way it rolled forward, like the driver wasn't sure if they should be there. The engine cut. Silence returned. Ethan stood near the doorway, waiting. The driver's door opened. A woman stepped out. Mid-30s, maybe a little older. Tall in a way that wasn't imposing, just stretched by time and responsibility. But her frame was slim, not from intention but from necessity, someone who didn't always eat when she should. Her dark hair was pulled back loosely, strands escaping around her face, catching the light in uneven lines. Her skin carried the pale tone of someone who spent more time inside than out, but the edges of her hands were rough, calloused lightly, like she did work that didn't get acknowledged. Her eyes, brown, steady, tired, moved quickly over the station, then settled on Ethan. There was caution there, not fear, not yet. "Are you open?" she asked. Her voice was soft, but not weak, controlled, like she had learned to keep things measured even when they weren't. Ethan shook his head once. Not officially. She nodded slightly, as if she had expected that answer. "I don't need much," she said. "Just a place to sit for a minute." Ethan stepped aside. "Doors open." She hesitated, then walked past him. Bruno shifted as she entered, him standing now, watching her carefully, not blocking, not approaching, just present. She noticed him. "That's a big dog," she said quietly. "He listens," Ethan replied. She gave a faint, tired smile. "That's more than most people." Inside, she moved toward the chair. The chair. Ethan watched as she reached it, pausing just before sitting, as if something about it mattered more than it should. Then she lowered herself slowly, carefully, like she hadn't rested in a while. Ethan turned toward the small storage area, grabbing a bottle of water. He handed it to her without a word. She took it. "Thank you." She drank slowly, not rushing, like she was trying to stretch the moment. Ethan leaned against the counter, watching the space, not her. "What happened to your car?" he asked after a moment. She glanced toward the window. "Overheating," she said. "Been doing it for a week. I kept thinking it'd hold." A small pause. "It didn't." Ethan nodded. That tracked, and he pushed off the counter. "I'll take a look." Her eyes lifted slightly. "You don't have to. I know." He stepped outside before she could finish. Bruno followed. The hood of the car was warm when Ethan lifted it. Heat rose in a soft wave, carrying the faint smell of coolant and worn metal. He scanned quickly. Hose worn. Clamp loose. Not catastrophic. Yet. He adjusted what he could with the tools he had. Movements precise, efficient. Not rushing, not guessing. Fixing. Behind him, the woman stepped out, standing a few feet away. "My name's Mara," she said. Ethan didn't look up. "Ethan." She nodded, though he didn't see it. Bruno moved suddenly, not toward the road, not toward Mara, toward Ethan. The dog stepped in close, almost pressing against his side, something he hadn't done before. His body angled inward, not outward, his focus shifting, not scanning the environment, but anchoring. Ethan froze for a fraction of a second. That wasn't a warning posture. That wasn't alert. That was grounding. He glanced down. Bruno's eyes met his, steady, unmoving. For a brief moment, the world narrowed. The sound of wind, the distant hum of another passing vehicle. Mara shifting her weight behind him. All of it faded. There was just that look, and something in it that Ethan hadn't felt in a long time. Not tension, not readiness, something else. He blinked. The moment passed. Bruno stepped back, returning to his usual position. Ethan exhaled slowly, turning back to the engine. He tightened the last clamp and lowered the hood. "It'll hold," he said. "Not forever, but enough." Mara stepped closer. "How much?" Ethan shook his head. "Nothing." She frowned slightly. "That doesn't make sense. It doesn't have to." She studied him for a second longer, then nodded. "Okay." She didn't argue, didn't push, just accepted it in a way that suggested she didn't always get to. She reached into her car and pulled out a small bag, worn at the edges, then walked back toward the station. Ethan followed. Inside, she paused near the counter, then looked around the space again. "It's quiet here," she said. Ethan leaned against the wall. "Yeah." She set the bottle down. "Feels like it's waiting," she added. Ethan didn't respond. Because that was harder to deny. Mara moved toward the door. Before stepping out, she glanced back once. "You'll open it," she said. Not a question. Ethan met her gaze. "Working on it." She nodded, then left. The car started. This time, the engine sounded steadier. Not fixed, but holding. She pulled out slowly, then onto the road, disappearing into the trees. Ethan stood in the doorway, watching. Bruno sat beside him. The road stretched out again. But something had shifted. Not in the distance, in the space right in front of him. A place where someone had stopped. Not because they had to, because they chose to. Ethan looked down at his hands. Still marked. Still carrying the past. Then at the station. Still broken. Still standing. He nodded once. "Yeah," he said quietly. "That's how it starts." Bruno didn't move, but his tail shifted once against the ground, and for the first time, the station didn't feel like something that had been left behind. It felt like something that could hold. The mornings had started to feel different. Not louder, not busier, but no longer empty. Ethan Cade stood just outside the station, one hand wrapped loosely around a chipped enamel mug that held more warmth than taste. The coffee was thin, almost bitter, but it did what it needed to do. Kept his hands from going cold, kept his body moving. The gravel in the lot carried more marks now. Not many, but enough. Tire tracks overlapped in places, some shallow, some deeper. A pattern beginning to form, not consistent, not reliable, but present. Bruno sat beside the doorway, his posture relaxed in a way that would have looked casual to anyone who didn't know better. His body was still angled toward the road, but his head rested lower now, ears shifting only when something earned it. He wasn't watching everything anymore, just what mattered. Ethan noticed that. He noticed everything. The sound of a vehicle approached, not fast, not slow, deliberate. Ethan didn't turn right away. He took one more sip, then set the mug down on the edge of the wooden post. The truck rolled into view. He recognized it before it fully came into the lot. Same dark pickup. Same uneven idle. Harold Quinn. The truck didn't stop immediately this time. It rolled forward, then paused, then adjusted slightly before settling near the side of the station. Not as close as before, not as distant either. A middle ground. The engine cut. Silence followed. Ethan remained where he was. Bruno lifted his head. The dog's posture changed, not tense, not defensive, but aware in a deeper way. His eyes tracked the driver's door before it even opened. Harold stepped out. He looked different. Not dramatically, but enough. His shoulders seemed lower, as if something he had been carrying had shifted position, not gone, just moved, and his clothes were the same. Worn jacket, heavy boots, jeans that had seen more years than they should have, but there was less certainty in the way he wore them now. His eyes met Ethan's, and held, longer than before. "I heard you fixed someone's car," Harold said. His voice carried across the space between them, quieter than it had been the last time. Ethan didn't react immediately. "Needed fixing," he said. Harold nodded once. Like that made sense. Because it did. He took a few steps closer, stopping just outside the edge of the lot where gravel gave way to packed dirt. Bruno stood, not moving forward, just rising. His body aligned with Ethan's position, slightly ahead, slightly angled, watching. Harold noticed. Again. "That dog still doesn't like me," he said. Ethan's expression didn't change. "He doesn't forget easy." Harold let out a slow breath. "Yeah," he said. "Neither do I." A pause stretched between them. Different this time. Not sharp, not defensive. Just there. Harold looked at the station, at the door, at the repaired panels, at the chair inside, visible through the open frame. His gaze lingered there. "You fixed that," he said. Ethan followed his line of sight. "Needed fixing." Harold nodded again, but this time something in his expression shifted. Not agreement, not approval. Something closer to recognition. Bruno moved. Not toward Harold, not toward the road, toward Ethan. He stepped closer than he usually did during conversations, positioning himself just at Ethan's side, his shoulder almost touching Ethan's leg. Then he sat, slowly, deliberately, and for the first time since Harold had arrived, he looked away from Harold, completely, as if the decision had been made. Ethan felt it, not as a signal, as a change, a line that had been held and was now lowered. He didn't react outwardly, but something in his chest shifted, Harold noticed too. "You train him to do that?" he asked quietly. Ethan shook his head once. "No." Harold looked at Bruno for a moment longer, then back at Ethan. "Figures." He stepped forward again, closer this time. Not enough to close the distance completely, but enough to show intention. "I need work," he said. The words landed without force, but they didn't need it. Ethan didn't answer right away. He studied Harold. Not his face, not his posture. Something deeper. Looking for consistency. Harold didn't look away, didn't defend, didn't explain. He just stood there, waiting. Ethan glanced briefly at Bruno. The dog didn't move, didn't react, just remained. Neutral. That was new. Ethan exhaled slowly. "What kind of work?" he asked. Harold shrugged slightly. "Whatever needs doing." There was no pride in it, no performance, just truth. Ethan nodded once. "There's a section out back," he said. "Walls starting to separate from the frame. Needs reinforcing." Harold followed his gaze. "I can do that." Ethan stepped aside. "Then start there." No handshake, no agreement spoken, just movement. Harold walked past him, not rushed, not hesitant, just forward. Bruno watched him go, for a moment, then turned his attention back to the road. Ethan picked up his mug again. The coffee had gone colder. He drank it anyway. Behind the station, the sound of work began. Wood shifting. Tools moving. The rhythm wasn't clean at first, slightly off, like someone remembering how to do something they hadn't touched in a long time. But it steadied. Gradually. Ethan didn't interfere. He moved inside, checking the supplies, adjusting what he could, letting the sound behind him exist without controlling it. Time passed. Not quickly, not slowly. Just enough. At some point, Ethan stepped outside again, walked around to the back. Harold was there, crouched near the wall, sleeves rolled up, hands dirty from the work. His movements were more confident now, less uncertain. The muscle memory had returned, or maybe it had never left. He looked up briefly as Ethan approached. It was worse than it looked," he said. Ethan nodded. "Usually is." Harold gave a faint, almost tired smile. "Yeah." He went back to work. No conversation, no tension. Just two men in the same space, doing something that needed doing. Bruno appeared a few minutes later, walking the perimeter once before settling down near the edge of the lot where he could see both the road and the back wall. Balanced. Always balanced. Ethan leaned against the side of the building, arms folded loosely. He watched Harold work. Watched the way his hands moved, the way he adjusted pressure, the way he checked alignment before committing. Not careless. Not anymore. Ethan had seen that before, in other places, other people. The ones who had something to lose, the ones who knew it. The work continued until the light began to shift again. The sun dipped lower, shadows stretching across the ground. Harold stood, wiping his hands against his jeans, stepping back to look at what he had done. The wall held. Straight. Secure. Ethan pushed off the wall and stepped forward, testing it with a firm hand. Solid. He nodded once. "That'll hold." Harold didn't smile, but something in his shoulders lifted slightly. "Yeah," he said. He gathered his tools slowly, not rushing to leave, not staying longer than needed, just finishing. Ethan walked back toward the front. Harold followed a few steps behind, stopping near the edge of the lot. "Same time tomorrow?" Harold asked. Ethan looked at him, measured, then nodded once. "Yeah." Harold gave a small nod in return. No more words. He climbed back into his truck. The engine started. The vehicle pulled away. This time, it didn't hesitate. Didn't linger. It just left. Ethan stood in the doorway again. Bruno beside him. The road stretched out, unchanged. But something had been added to it. Not a person. Not a promise. Something quieter. A shift. Ethan rested his hand against the doorframe. The wood felt different. Not because it had changed. Because something else had. He looked down briefly at Bruno. The dog didn't look back. He didn't need to. Ethan exhaled slowly. "Yeah," he said under his breath. "That's how it works." And for the first time since he had arrived, he wasn't doing this alone. Spring didn't arrive loudly in Hollow Creek. It unfolded. Slowly, like something remembering how to live. The snow that once clung stubbornly to the edges of the road had pulled back into shadows. The ground beneath the station had softened just enough to carry the scent of earth again. Not dust, not decay, but something quieter, something patient. Ethan Cade stood at the front of the station, one hand resting loosely against the wooden post that now stood straight, reinforced, holding its place against time. The building had changed, not in a way that demanded attention, but in a way that made it impossible to ignore. The door no longer sagged, the counter stood balanced, the walls, once uncertain, held steady against the wind that moved through the trees with less resistance now, as if even the forest had decided this place deserved to remain. Bruno lay near the entrance. Older now, if not in years, then in something deeper. His sable coat caught the light in quiet patterns, the mix of cream, gray, and black, blending into something that felt grounded. His body rested, but not loosely. There was still tension in him, still purpose, just not the kind that came from searching, the kind that came from knowing. Ethan watched the road. He didn't wait anymore. That was the difference. Vehicles came. Some slowed, some didn't. A few stopped. Not many, but enough. Inside the station, a small shelf now held items that hadn't been there before: bottled water, a basic coffee setup, a handful of packaged food that didn't promise much, but offered something. It wasn't a business yet, not in the way people would measure, but it was functioning. Behind the station, the sound of movement carried lightly through the air. Harold Quinn worked without needing to be told. His hands moved with familiarity now, reinforcing structures, replacing worn sections, adjusting what Ethan had started. There was less hesitation in him. Not gone, but quieter. The past hadn't left him. It had just shifted. Ethan turned slightly, watching him for a moment. Harold didn't look up, didn't need to. They had learned each other without conversation. That was enough. The sound of another vehicle approached. Ethan didn't move. Bruno lifted his head slightly. The car slowed, turned, pulled into the lot. A familiar sedan. Mara. The engine cut. This time she stepped out without hesitation. Her posture had changed, too. Not dramatically, but enough. She moved like someone who had decided something. Her dark hair was tied back more tightly now, less loose than before, and there was more color in her face, not from rest, but from movement, from direction. She walked toward the station. "You're open," she said. Ethan nodded once. "Enough." She stepped inside, glancing briefly at the shelves, the counter, the space. "It feels different," she said. Ethan leaned against the wall. "It is." She set a small bag on the counter. "Coffee beans," she said. "Better than what you're using." Ethan glanced at it, then at her. "You didn't have to." She shrugged lightly. "I know." A pause. Then softer. "Someone did that for me once." Ethan didn't ask. He didn't need to. Bruno stood and moved inside, settling near the doorway again, watching both the road and the room with quiet balance. Mara reached for the chair. The same chair. She paused again, just as she had before. But this time, she didn't sit immediately. Her hand rested lightly on the backrest. Her fingers traced the faint carving. CC. She tilted her head slightly, as if listening to something not quite there. Then she spoke. "My grandfather used to mark his tools like this," she said quietly. "Said if something lasted long enough to be passed down, it deserved to be remembered." Ethan felt it, not as memory, as alignment. Different lives, different places. Same idea. He stepped closer, just slightly. He built this place, Ethan said. Mara nodded. I can tell. She sat. This time, fully, comfortably, like the chair belonged to her as much as it had ever belonged to anyone else. Bruno watched her. Then, slowly, he lowered himself to the floor, not in readiness, not in caution, in rest. Complete. Ethan noticed. That was new. The door creaked softly as the wind moved again, but it didn't shift out of place. It held. Everything here was starting to hold. Mara leaned back slightly in the chair, her gaze drifting toward the doorway. People will come, she said. Ethan didn't answer right away. Not because he doubted, because he no longer needed to say it. Another vehicle passed, then another. One slowed, turned. A truck pulled into the lot. Not Caleb, not Harold. Someone new. A man stepped out. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Lean, restless energy in the way he moved. Like someone used to chasing something he hadn't found yet. His clothes were clean, but worn at the edges. Boots scuffed, hands slightly unsteady, not from weakness, but from too much caffeine, too little rest. He looked around, then at Ethan. You open? He asked. Ethan nodded once. Yeah. The man stepped inside, glancing briefly at Mara, then at Bruno. He hesitated. Just a second. Then relaxed. Name's Tyler, he said. Ethan nodded. Ethan. Tyler moved toward the counter, running a hand along its surface. You fix this place up? He asked. Working on it. Tyler nodded. Good, he said. Road needed something like this. Ethan glanced at him. Why? Tyler shrugged. Because not everything should be fast, he said. Some places, people need to stop. Mara looked at him, then at Ethan. No one spoke, because nothing needed to be added. Harold stepped around from the back, or pausing when he saw the scene, the room, the people, the space. He didn't interrupt, didn't insert himself. He just stood there and watched. Ethan saw him, held his gaze for a moment, then nodded once. Harold nodded back. No words, Bruno shifted slightly, adjusting his position so that he faced the room. Not the road this time. Balanced. Everything. Balanced. The light outside softened as the sun lowered, casting long shadows across the lot. The station stood, not as something restored, not as something new, as something that had always been there, waiting. Ethan stepped outside once more, standing at the edge of the lot. The road stretched ahead, still quiet, still uncertain, but no longer empty. He looked back at the station, at the door, at the people inside, at the dog who no longer needed to watch everything. He exhaled slowly. There had been a time when he would have left, when staying would have felt like a risk. Now, it felt like the only thing that made sense, and he rested his hand against the post again. The wood was solid beneath his fingers, unmoving, reliable, like something that had chosen to remain. Ethan nodded once, almost to himself. Yeah, he said quietly. And this time, there was no hesitation. There are moments in life when everything we see feels small, broken, or not worth holding on to. We are handed things that look like burdens, places that seem forgotten, or paths that appear to lead nowhere. And in those moments, it is easy to believe that nothing meaningful can grow from them. But sometimes, what looks like nothing is where everything begins. God does not always work through grand signs or sudden miracles. More often, He moves quietly through persistence, through kindness, through the strength to stay when leaving would be easier. A worn place can become a place of healing. A tired heart can become a source of strength for others. And a simple act of helping someone, even when you expect nothing in return, can change more lives than you ever realize. The miracle is not always in what we receive. Sometimes, and it is in what we choose to build, protect, and give day after day, even when no one is watching. If you are in a season where life feels uncertain, where your efforts seem unnoticed, remember this: God sees what you are building. He sees your patience, your faith, and your quiet strength. And in His time, what you have held onto with honesty and courage will begin to grow. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share where you are watching from, or leave a comment about what you are going through. Your story matters, and you are not alone. Please consider subscribing to the channel so you don't miss more stories about faith, resilience, and second chances. May God bless you, protect you, and guide your path wherever you are today.